Hey there everyone, Tyler Pyburn here with Phil DiMartino. We're both from 5 Tool Productions, and today we are talking about measurement of your content. And not just that it's important that you need to measure, but how you're actually measuring is also wildly important. And this kind of stems from an article that I read on Moz.com. So Moz, SEO Moz, they are just a fantastic company that focuses on SEO. So all the things, the keywords that you use and put on your website to make sure that you're being found by way of search. Right. Now, what's interesting about that, they started talking and going down a rabbit hole of, not just measuring conversions site-wide, but measuring the impact of content based on intent. And I found that really interesting because so often we look at the whole thing and say, how did this piece of content do? How are we converting on the site? Well, on a website, individual pages have different means and have different people that they're targeting. And we literally just walked out of a meeting 20 minutes ago talking about, well, you need to serve the right content to the right people. So what I want to do right now, Phil, is talk about not just the importance of measurement, but some numbers, while you think mean a lot, really don't mean all that much. What are your thoughts on measurement as a whole?
Yeah, I think that social media has done a lot of good and a lot of bad. Yeah. One of the things that's been a negative, probably a little bit smaller in the scale of the balance of things that are positive and negative from social media. Anyway, I'm getting off track. One of the things that's been maybe a negative from a marketing standpoint with social media is that there's these metrics that are really easily available and publicly viewable. And because they're there and they're easy, it's things that people automatically just gravitate to and focus on. Things like likes and shares and these things.
Views, followers, things like that.
Follower counts, all of these things. And ultimately, they're, a lot of times people call them vanity metrics. They're things that are there and, they might be indicators of success in other areas, but they don't ultimately tell you a whole heck of a lot. So when you talk about measurement and intent, I think the most important place to start is that every single business and every single organization is going to have different key indicators that matter to them. So starting from, there's no one-size-fits-all approach here. There are some things that are going to be transferable across company and across industry, but you have to start from the standpoint of what matters to me. What metrics matter to me and to my business and to my company? And that's the only way you can measure effectively, right? And I think what happens, the trap that a lot of people fall into is just, well, here's the things I can get relatively easily via these big social platforms, so that's what I'm going to measure. But ultimately, that might not matter to you at all.
Yeah, what's really interesting is for us, one of the questions we always encounter when we're talking to people is, how many people watched? Is that good?
Yeah.
Is that a good number?
Right.
It's tough to say because it's so subjective too, right? A great number, what I think might be good, might not necessarily be great for your organization or vice versa. You might have thousands of people tuning in, but if it's not the right audience that's actually watching, who cares? It doesn't matter. If your audience is, 40 to 50-year-old females, if you have 10,000 views from 13 to 15-year-old males, that might not necessarily be what we're really looking for.
Right.
That's not a good thing.
You go into old school rating systems for TV and radio, and they break it down by
That's
demographics,
how they break
just
it in,
like
by
that.
demographic.
So even going back, those are standard, views or listeners or whatever. Yeah. But you're absolutely right. So starting with understanding what you want is important. You mentioned viewer counts, and I think a big area that we live in obviously is live productions.
Yep.
Number of views is something you should go into it understanding a rough idea of how many people do I want to come to this, right?
How many people am I marketing to get this? How many people have I signed up for this? How many people are that interested?
If you have a list of 1,000 people that are, these are people who I think are good potential people who might tune into this broadcast, and you broadcast it and 500 people tune in and they watch the whole show, you're not going to be disappointed that you didn't get 1 million. You're going to be thrilled that you got 500 of the right people to tune in and watch your whole show.
Yep.
So, if you're producing the Super Bowl and you got 500 people to watch, you're going to be a little disappointed because your potential audience is the entire world, right? So it all depends on what your expectations are. Now, we talk about metrics for live. One of the big things that we always focus with that I think is transferable across different companies and industries, regardless of the number of people who watch or who they are or whatever it is average time spent watching its audience.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. Yep.
And if you're producing long-form content or short-form content, but it's more easily, it's easier to check on this if you're doing an hour-plus show or something like that. Audience retention. How long did the average person stick around for your show? And that at least gives you a sense of...
That will tell you if that content is good or not.
Is it relevant?
People enjoyed it. Is it relevant
engaging?
To the audience that you put? Exactly.
If you do an hour-long show and 100,000 people tuned in, but the average watch time was 3 seconds, not the best.
And it is also dependent upon platform as well, right? You have to go into it knowing, Facebook, the attention spans are short. There's other things that can get people's attention, so it's going to be pulled away pretty quickly. So you have to think and say, well, you know what, maybe the numbers are going to be a little less there, but if we're driving people to one specific site, one specific page, maybe the time on site, that's what we're going to be measuring and that's what we're going to be focusing on. I remember we actually just did a recent event with one of our favorite clients, and they had just a fantastic event that they put on. And they brought in Leland Melvin, who was an engineer, an astronaut, works with NASA, a former NFL player. So obviously, his story alone was just fantastic. But it was an hour-long event. The watch time was over 50 minutes.
Yeah.
So you think about that, you say, okay, well, how many people do we have watch? A few hundred? Is that good or bad? Well, the people that did watch, they all stayed on. Your content was fantastic. So the amount of people actually watching might not necessarily reflect how good the content is. It's actually reflecting the marketing to drive people to the actual content itself, right? So that's in the audience size for a piece of content or a show like that.
And I think the question when you put on a live event is, what are you trying to get out of it, right? If you're putting on an event as a nonprofit and you're trying to connect with a group of key major potential donors, that pool doesn't have to be big. You just have to get in front of the right people, and you have to give them something that they're actually going to care about. So there of course needs to be a focus on getting those people in the room, but you can't skimp on the what are they going to get when they're in the room. And when I say the room, I mean the virtual room or the in-person room.
Or the in-person room, whatever it may be. So, it's the same thing. If you had an in-person event and people were saying, drifting off to sleep in the middle
or
of the
getting
speaker,
up and walking out
getting up to go
halfway
get
through.
water or having conversation, you can say, well, this was junk content. We shouldn't have done this.
And the important thing when you're thinking about live streaming content is that it's a lot easier and a lot more socially acceptable for someone to get up and walk out of the room if they're in their living room or their office than it is if they're in an auditorium. So you've got to work a lot harder to keep them there, and you've got to have a better focus on what that key content is that they actually want to see. Because, John Smith might, not get up in the middle of an event and be rude in an auditorium and just walk out the back door and go home. But if he's sitting on his couch and he's got, a family at home that can distract him and other things to do at home, he can flip on the TV instead. It's a better chance you're going to lose them if you don't do a really good job. So you got to do a really good job with the content. You got to make sure it's catered to them.
No question. All right, he is Phil DiMartino. I am Tyler Piper. We're both from 5 Tool Productions. Thank you so very much for tuning in and watching this. We'll see you next time.